It began with a whisper that wasn't a word, a growl that wasn't a threat, and a secret buried deep enough to rewrite a man's fate. No cameras caught the moment when everything turned, but those who were there swear they'll never forget it. Watch carefully, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Like, subscribe and drop a comment below to tell us what you think is really hiding behind the silence. The courtroom was airless, heavy with the kind of silence that made people forget how to breathe. Dust floated in the shafts of light, slipping through the tall windows, cutting across the old oak benches like pale ribbons. When the double doors creaked open, all attention turned to the sound of small footsteps. 6-year-old Emmett Rowe, a quiet black boy with skin the shade of polished walnut and eyes too old for his age, entered with slow, deliberate steps. He wore a white shirt buttoned to the collar and held tightly to the leather leash of Rook, a large German shepherd whose very presence seemed to anchor him to the ground. The dog's left ear was torn from an old rescue mission, his gait steady and measured like a veteran soldier returning to the battlefield. Together they looked out of place, two survivors in a room built for judgment. No one spoke, but thoughts filled the silence. Some saw courage, others saw fragility. Most saw something they could not name, a living bond that felt sacred. Emmett's small hand gripped the leash as if letting go might unravel him entirely. He kept his gaze low, the soft curls on his forehead trembling as he breathed in shallow bursts. The boy hadn't spoken since the night he'd been taken, a night that ended with him being found in the woods, shaking with Rook guarding him from the dark. Since then, not a single word. The doctors called it selective mutism brought on by trauma. His mother called it a wall she couldn't climb. Now, under the towering gaze of strangers, Emmett stood at the threshold of that wall once more. Judge Walter Briggs, an old man with hair the color of winter ash, leaned forward slightly. He had seen it all: violence, greed, betrayal, but there was something about this boy that reached beneath his armor of reason. Briggs had never trembled in a courtroom, not once in 30 years yet. As he reached for his gavel, his fingers betrayed him. He cleared his throat, hoping no one saw. "Bring the witness forward," the clerk said. The sound of her voice felt intrusive. Emmett moved slowly toward the chair, his polished shoes squeaking faintly. Rook followed beside him, muscles taut, but movements controlled, as though he understood this was a place where calm could speak louder than noise. The bailiff hesitated before allowing the dog to stay, but one look from the judge silenced any objection. The courtroom seemed to expand and contract around that permission. People shifted in their seats. They weren't used to this: a dog in court, a child who would not talk, a silence that felt like truth waiting to be born. At the defense table sat Gavin Morrow, the accused, a clean-shaven man in his 40s. His face was carved with the confidence of someone who had spent his life convincing others he was harmless. He smirked slightly as the boy passed his eyes, following like a shadow that refused to die. Rook's head turned toward him, one ear lifting, nostrils flaring. The growl that followed was low, deep, and unmistakably personal. Morrow's smirk faltered for a second, just a second, but Briggs saw it. The judge's jaw tightened. "Mr. Morrow," he said evenly, "you will maintain composure in my courtroom." The man nodded, pretending calm, but his hand twitched on the table. Emmett reached the witness stand. The bailiff held out a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" Silence. The boy looked at the book, then at his mother seated in the front row, her eyes glistening, lips moving in a prayer only she could hear. Rook stepped closer, pressing against Emmett's leg. The child took a breath, trembling but grounded by the weight of the animal beside him. He lifted his right hand, small fingers barely steady. He didn't speak the oath, but everyone understood the gesture. Sometimes truth doesn't need sound to exist. Briggs watched, and something deep inside him shifted. It wasn't just pity, it was an awakening. In this room built on logic, the law suddenly felt too small to hold what stood before him. When the prosecutor began the opening question, Emmett didn't respond. He stared at Morrow, eyes wide, and for an instant the courtroom seemed to blur. His breathing quickened, memories flickering behind his gaze. Headlights roped the smell of gasoline and Rook's bark slicing through the dark. Rook tensed again, tail straight, chest rising as if ready to act. The boy's hand reached out unconsciously, resting on the dog's neck, grounding himself in that living warmth. The judge noticed it, the rhythm of a bond that no rulebook could define. He set his pen down, a rare thing. He'd seen witnesses crumble attorneys' fake emotion, but never this kind of honesty. Truth wasn't being spoken, it was being felt. Briggs's voice softened. "Take your time, son." The boy blinked. His lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes darted to Rook, then back to Morrow. A muscle twitched in the man's jaw. That tiny detail, the kind only a child and a dog would notice, seemed to stir something unspoken. Rook made a faint rumbling noise, not quite a growl, more like a warning sent from instinct to conscience. The air thickened. For one fragile heartbeat, everything in that room existed between silence and revelation. Then Briggs lifted his gavel, his knuckles trembling. He didn't know why, but he felt it in his bones. This trial was not about guilt alone. The courtroom reconvened after the recess, but the air hadn't loosened. It clung heavy to the walls, a residue of everything unspoken. Judge Briggs sat a little lower in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. His eyes, though sharp as ever, carried something new: hesitation. He glanced once at Emmett and the dog sitting by his feet. The boy's posture hadn't changed. Shoulders tucked, head lowered. One hand resting on Rook's neck like it was the only solid ground left in the world. Across from them, Gavin Morrow leaned back, exuding casual defiance. He didn't expect the boy to talk. Everyone knew the child hadn't uttered a sound in months. What Morrow didn't know was that silence had a rhythm of its own, a rhythm Rook could read like breath. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman named Clara Hayes, adjusted her glasses and spoke softly. "Emmett," she said, careful, like testing a frozen lake, "I just want to ask if you recognize the man sitting over there." The question hung in the air. Emmett didn't blink. He stared at the floor thumb brushing the worn patch of Rook's collar. A tremor passed through his small body, one that made his mother tighten her grip on her rosary. Seconds stretched thin. Then slowly Emmett lifted his head. His gaze met Morrow's. The courtroom seemed to constrict. The fluorescent lights buzzed too loudly. Even the ticking of the old clock at the back wall felt intrusive. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Then his hand reached instinctively for Rook's fur, clutching it so hard his knuckles whitened. Rook reacted first. The shepherd's body stiffened, tail-low eyes locked on Morrow. The growl that followed wasn't loud, but it was ancient, an instinctive verdict spoken from memory. Everyone froze. Morrow's grin, sharp and smug, faltered. A flicker of fear crossed his face there, for half a second, gone the next, but long enough for the judge to notice. Order Briggs said, his voice rougher than usual. Rook quieted immediately, though his gaze never wavered. The boy pressed closer to him, small body trembling, as if the dog's shadow was safer than the world itself. Clara took a cautious step forward. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, crouching just enough to meet the child's eyes. "You don't have to speak if you can't. You can nod or point, anything you want." Emmett didn't move. He blinked twice, chest rising and falling in uneven waves. The faint hum of the ceiling fan above was the only sound that dared exist. Judge Briggs leaned forward, elbows on the bench. He wasn't watching the prosecutor or the defense anymore. He was watching the space between the boy and the man, the invisible thread of fear that told a story no testimony ever could. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice low, "give him time." Clara nodded and stepped back. Morrow leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something, his smirk slowly returning as if reclaiming control. But the small victory didn't last long. Rook shifted, placing himself directly between Emmett and the defendant's table. The positioning was unmistakable protection. And in that gesture, a silent truth bled through the cracks of legal formality. Briggs's thoughts turned heavy. He had studied law to define justice, but this moment reminded him that sometimes justice wasn't spoken in full sentences. It breathed quietly between heartbeats. "Mr. Morrow," he said suddenly, his tone a warning wrapped in civility, "do not provoke this courtroom." Morrow blinked. "Your Honor, I haven't said a word." "Then keep it that way," Briggs said. Eyes narrowing. The defense attorney raised a hand. Objection overruled. The judge snapped voice, carrying the edge of authority that made even silence obey. Emmett shifted in his seat, gripping the armrest. His breathing had slowed, but his eyes were unfocused, as if memories were replaying behind them like film reels no one else could see. Rope against his wrists, gasoline on his tongue, the cold air of a basement, and then Rook's bark, fierce and desperate, shattering the night. He remembered hands, the flash of a knife, and a scream that never made it out. He remembered the smell of fear, not his own, but the man's, when Rook lunged. That same scent filled the air, now faint but undeniable. Rook smelled it too. The shepherd's nostrils flared, ears twitching, as if recognizing the same ghost. A low rumble rolled from his chest, not loud enough to be called a sound, but deep enough for every human in the room to feel it beneath the skin. The judge didn't silence him this time. He let it happen. Because somewhere between law and instinct, he realized the dog wasn't attacking, he was remembering. Clara spoke again, this time with the gentleness of someone addressing both child and guardian. "Emmett, you don't have to talk," she said softly. "You can tell Rook instead. You can show him." The boy turned his head toward her, unsure, then looked down at his companion. His small hand moved, once fingers tapping twice on the leash. It was a motion so subtle that only those paying close attention noticed. Rook's ears lifted, and for a breath his entire body stilled. Then came another growl, lower this time, but it was followed by something that startled even his handler, a short bark, sharp and direct, the kind used in K-9 commands to mark target confirmed. The sound cracked through the stillness like lightning. Morrow flinched, chair scraping backward, the smug mask gone. Every deputy's hand went to their holster out of reflex. Clara stepped back. Briggs's gavel slammed down once. Enough. The echo bounced against the marble walls. Silence reclaimed the room, but the truth had already landed. The boy hadn't pointed. He hadn't spoken. But his protector had. In that single sound, the entire narrative shifted from a quiet victim's uncertainty to something living, primal and undeniable. When order returned, Briggs leaned forward, his voice measured. "Court will adjourn for today," he said. The bailiff began clearing the aisles, people whispering as if they'd just witnessed something divine rather than procedural. Emmett didn't move until his mother appeared beside him. Morning light slanted through the courthouse windows the following day, cold, and filtered through clouds heavy with rain. The benches filled once again, the murmur of spectators buzzing low before dying into silence when Judge Briggs entered. He looked older than yesterday, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He had replayed the moment in his mind all night, the bark, the flinch, the fear in Morrow's eyes. It haunted him, not as evidence, but as truth untamed by protocol. This morning the tension felt different. Even the walls seemed to remember. Emmett sat in the same chair as before, feet barely touching the floor. He wore the same pressed shirt sleeves, slightly rolled from his mother's nervous hands. Rook was beside him again, silent sentinel eyes, sharp and aware. The boy's fingers rested lightly on the leash, tapping occasionally like he was counting heartbeats. The prosecutor began softly, as though afraid her words might break the fragile calm. "Emmett." "We're almost done," Clara Hayes said. "You're doing very well. I want you to look at me." Okay, Emmett did. His eyes were steady now, though still hiding something vast beneath their quiet. Clara glanced briefly at the judge, then back at the boy. Yesterday, she continued, you reacted when you saw the man sitting over there. That's okay. You're brave for being here. I know it's hard, but do you remember the sign Dr. Tanner taught you? The one that means I remember. The words seemed to hang between them. Emmett's lips twitched, but he said nothing. The people in the gallery leaned forward slightly the way people do when waiting for a miracle. He took a slow breath and looked at Rook. Then with the smallest motion, his right hand twitched twice on the leash. 2 deliberate taps, quick, faint, unmistakable. Rook froze, every muscle aligning, his eyes snapping to the defendant. The room went still. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Gavin Morrow's confident posture faltered. For a split second, his smirk melted into something raw recognition. Fear, maybe both. Rook's chest vibrated with a low rumble, a sound that came from deep memory, not command. It wasn't anger, it was remembrance, the kind of growl that said, I've seen you before, Your Honor. The defense attorney started, but Briggs held up a hand. Quiet. His gaze shifted from the boy to the dog, then to the accused. His instincts screamed what his duty couldn't name. He'd seen dogs react before. Territorial, startled, protective, but not like this. This was precise. Intentional. Clara didn't speak. She didn't need to. The boy had just given testimony without uttering a syllable. Rook's growl deepened, vibrating through the bench floor. The sound reached every chest in the room, crawling into ribs like thunder before a storm. Morrow leaned forward, jaw-tight, knuckles white against the table. Then he whispered something to his lawyer, too quiet for the microphones, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Judge Briggs slammed the gavel once. We'll take a short recess, he declared, though his tone left no room for argument. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously, flashes from cameras lighting the edges of the room until the bailiff barked for order. As the crowd began to move, Emmett stayed frozen. Rook was tense but obedient, his eyes still locked on the man who had taken something from them both. When the room finally cleared, Briggs stood and descended from the bench, something he almost never did. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. Son, he said quietly, did you mean to do that? Emmett didn't answer, but his eyes glistened. The judge noticed the faint tremor in the boy's fingers still touching the leash like a line of communication between worlds. Briggs turned his gaze to the dog, who hadn't moved except to blink. That animal's not just reacting, he muttered to Clara. He's remembering. Clara nodded, voice low. Rook was part of a rescue unit before Emmett's father adopted him. He's trained to respond to distress, fear, and memory cues. Memory cues, Briggs repeated, tasting the words, meaning he can link scent to emotion. Yes, she said. If he recognizes someone by the scent tied to fear, he'll react the same way he did when it first happened. Briggs exhaled, slowly rubbing his temple. So if that man... His voice trailed off. The implication didn't need finishing. They all knew. If Morrow carried the scent of that night, the dog's reaction wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. Back in the hallway, Emmett crouched next to Rook, wrapping his small arms around the dog's neck. The shepherd's breathing slowed, steady again, a rhythm the boy matched unconsciously. The child didn't cry. He just pressed his forehead against Rook's collar and whispered something no one caught. A prayer, maybe, or a thank you. Upstairs in chambers, Briggs stood at the window, watching rain streak the glass. He'd handled hundreds of testimonies, but never one like this. A dog and a child, he murmured almost to himself. God help us, that might be the purest form of truth I've ever seen. When the court resumed that afternoon, the tension returned sharper this time. The defense attorney tried to downplay the dog's behavior, calling it a trick of training, but the jurors' eyes said otherwise. They'd seen fear in Morrow's face. They'd heard that sound, instinctual, real, impossible to fake. Clara asked only one question, Emmett, when Rook reacted just now. What did that mean? The boy's fingers tapped once on the leash, not twice this time, but once. The signal for yes. Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. The defense rose in protest, claiming unreliable communication, but Briggs silenced them with a look that could cut stone. "Sit down," he ordered. This court recognizes behavioral testimony in line with trauma protocol. It wasn't standard law. It was humanity disguised as judgment. As Morrow sat, sweat pooling at his collar, Rook's gaze followed him steady, unblinking. It wasn't hatred. It was recognition laced with patience, as if the dog knew the man's lies would soon crumble under the weight of their own memory. The session ended without ceremony. The rain from outside followed them into the marble hallway, footprints glistening against the dim light as people dispersed after the session. The air was thick with murmurs, the kind that crawl between truth and rumor. 1,000 whispers tangled into something too human to silence. Emmett sat on a wooden bench beside his mother, the hem of her dress damp, her hands trembling slightly as she kept one arm wrapped protectively around her son. Rook sat upright at Emmett's feet, head-high eyes still focused on the courtroom door, as if waiting for something unseen to emerge. Judge Briggs stood a few paces away, speaking quietly with Clara Hayes. His expression was troubled, brows furrowed, lips pressed together as if weighing the weight of his own authority. He had broken courtroom routine yesterday and done it again today, not because of confusion, but because of a feeling he couldn't shake, something between instinct and faith. The boy's silence had spoken. The dog's growl had echoed in his bones. The truth was crawling toward the surface, whether he was ready or not. The click of polished shoes drew his attention. A tall man in a rain-darkened trench coat stepped into the hallway, flashing a badge before anyone could question him. "Agent Deacon Wells, Bureau Liaison for Behavioral Evidence," he said in a low, gravelly voice that carried quiet authority. "Your Honor, Miss Hayes, we need to talk." Briggs gestured toward an empty conference room down the corridor. Inside, the air felt cleaner, colder, like the walls themselves were listening. Wells laid a folder on the table, its corners damp from rain. "We ran background on the dog," he began, flipping through documents. "Rook isn't just any rescue animal. Before the Rowe family adopted him, he served with the county's K-9 division under the codename Ruger. Retired 3 years ago after a field injury." Briggs blinked, realization dawning slowly. "That explains the scar." "Exactly," Wells replied. "But there's more." During his service, Ruger was used in a joint operation involving narcotics and human trafficking. One of the officers assigned as a civilian consultant for that sting was your defendant, Gavin Morrow. The room fell silent. Clara's breath caught, and Briggs straightened, his mind already turning. "You're saying they've met before," he said. "Yes, sir. It gets darker. Morrow wasn't a suspect. Back then, he was an asset, an informant. Files show he handled impound logistics for the dog seized during that operation. Rook was one of them." Briggs's heart sank. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "So the dog wasn't reacting to the attack alone," he murmured. "He was reacting to memory, a memory of pain." Wells nodded grimly. "According to handlers, Rook was impounded for 2 months after the raid. Reports mentioned signs of distress, possible mistreatment. They never proved abuse, but the timeline fits perfectly. If Rook recognized Morrow's scent, it wasn't just from the abduction night, it was from something long before." Clara covered her mouth with one hand, eyes wet. "That means Morrow might have known the dog too," she said, "and still targeted Emmett later, which suggests motive," Briggs said quietly, "or unfinished business." The thunder outside growled like the sky itself was reacting to the revelation. Wells closed the folder and leaned forward. "You can't use this directly yet, but it's context. The kind juries feel even if they're never told. The animal's reaction isn't coincidence, it's recall. You've got a witness in that dog's instincts, and a link that puts Morrow in proximity to every unsolved case tied to that raid." Briggs's voice dropped. "Are you implying the abduction wasn't random?" Wells's eyes met his. "I'm saying you're sitting on a thread that could unravel a decade of buried names." The words hit hard. For a moment, the old judge felt the weight of every gavel strike he'd ever made, every verdict that felt certain until it wasn't. He turned toward the window, watching lightning flash across the gray skyline. God help us, he muttered. It's bigger than I thought. Outside in the hallway, Emmett remained quiet, his mother whispering soft prayers over his head. The boy's eyes, though, were fixed on Rook. The shepherd's breathing had slowed, deep and rhythmic. Then suddenly, without cue, Rook stood sniffing the air and began walking toward the far end of the hall. Emmett followed instinctively, his mother calling after him. The dog stopped by a narrow maintenance door and pawed once at the bottom claws, scraping metal. It was subtle but urgent. Clara, now rushing from the conference room, caught sight of them and frowned. What is he doing? Emmett didn't answer, just crouched down beside the dog, his tiny hand brushing the door's handle. The boy's eyes flicked up to Clara, pleading silently for help. Briggs joined them seconds later. "What's here?" he asked the bailiff nearby. "Old evidence storage," came the reply, "mostly retired files." "Open it," Briggs ordered. The door creaked open, releasing a cold draft that smelled of dust and cardboard. Inside, under flickering fluorescent light, rows of boxes lined the shelves. Rook entered first, sniffing one specific box on the lower rack, his tail lowered, body tense. Clara crouched, brushing away the label. It read, "Crawford County Operation Evidence Set C." Briggs's stomach dropped. That was the same raid Wells had mentioned, the one Morrow helped manage. Clara carefully opened the box, revealing photographs, police reports, and a list of confiscated items. One photo stopped her cold, a row of kennels, one of which showed Rook behind bars, younger but unmistakable eyes wide with panic. Standing beside the cages in the picture was Morrow, his face half turned toward the camera, smiling faintly as he labeled tags. The room went still except for Rook's growl, low and certain. The past had just walked into the present. "We'll verify this through official records," Briggs said, quietly closing the lid. "But this stays between us until I authorize otherwise." He turned to Clara. "If what this picture suggests is true, we're not trying one man for one crime. We're reopening a corridor of ghosts." Clara nodded, her face pale. Rook pressed against Emmett's leg, calming the boy, though his own body trembled faintly. The dog's instincts were still active, his gaze fixed on the courtroom door at the end of the hall, as though waiting for the truth to come back through it. Briggs placed a heavy hand on Wells's shoulder. "Keep digging," he said, discreetly. "If that file was left here, someone wanted it forgotten." Wells smirked faintly. "Well, Judge, seems your dog just reopened history." When the hallway emptied again, Briggs lingered, watching Emmett and Rook sitting quietly together. The next morning began with the low hum of rain against asphalt and the murmur of agents gathering evidence under gray skies. The courthouse was quieter than usual, the energy subdued but charged. Judge Briggs had ordered a temporary recess of the trial, authorizing the FBI to expand the investigation after the startling discovery in the storage room. Agent Deacon Wells was already in motion before dawn, his coat soaked from the early storm as he supervised a forensic sweep of Morrow's van parked in Federal Impound. Emmett and his mother stayed home for the first time in days, the boy curled on the couch with Rook lying protectively at his feet. The dog hadn't slept much. Even in rest, his body twitched as though his memories still patrolled through dreams. The world outside was moving, and something inside him knew that the truth was finally tracking closer. In the lab, Wells stood beside the lead technician, a thin man named Rowan Pierce, who carefully scraped dirt from the wheel wells of Morrow's van. "We found distinct layers," Pierce said, sliding a tray forward. "Top layer is standard road dust, bottoms different, rich with clay and decomposed pine. Matches the texture found in the marshlands north of Crawford County." Wells frowned, his pen frozen mid-note. "Crawford Marsh," he muttered. "That's where the old K9 raid happened." Pierce nodded. "The soil's almost identical to what we documented there years ago. It's got a unique microbial signature because of the silt content, meaning the van was there. Recently. Meaning it's been there in the past few weeks," Pierce replied. "And not for the first time. Either the layers show repeated exposure." Wells swore, quietly flipping through his notes. If Morrow had revisited that place, it wasn't nostalgia, it was unfinished business. Meanwhile, Judge Briggs sat in his chambers, the rain streaking the window beside him. He had just hung up the phone after a short, grim conversation with Wells. The information confirmed his fear the past and present were no longer separate. He leaned back in his chair, gazing at the photograph they had recovered from the evidence box, the one showing Rook caged Morrow tagging kennels. For the first time, the judge wondered if justice could be haunted. Across town, Clara Hayes joined Wells at the impound facility. Rook and Emmett had been brought along not for formal procedure, but because the dog's instincts were proving more reliable than any affidavit. They stood behind yellow tape while agents cataloged soil tires and trace materials. Emmett clung to his mother's coat sleeve, quiet, watching everything. Wells crouched beside Rook, showing him a laminated photograph of the marshland where the soil came from. "Recognize this place, boy," he murmured. Rook sniffed the image, then turned his head sharply toward the open van, tail dropping low, ears pricked forward. His muscles tightened, a sound deep in his chest building before he barked once, short, commanding, and unmistakable. Wells stood. He knows it. Clara stepped closer. Deacon. What if he's linking the scent to a memory from when he was a K-9? That's exactly what I'm counting on. The agent opened the back of the van again, letting Rook sniff the air. The dog's nostrils flared. He moved closer, lowering his head near the metal floor. Suddenly, he pawed at a small dent near the edge. Wells grabbed a flashlight and peered closer. Inside the narrow crease, barely visible, was a strand of fabric pink, frayed, stained by mud. He used tweezers to extract it and sealed it carefully in an evidence pouch. "Send this to Pierce," he ordered. "Full DNA workup." Clara felt the chill crawl up her spine. What if that belongs to another victim? "Then Morrow's not just an abductor," Wells said grimly. "He's a repeat offender hiding behind paperwork." Hours passed and the storm eased, but inside the lab, the atmosphere only grew heavier. When the DNA results came in that afternoon, they were worse than anyone expected. The fragment of fabric carried the genetic signature of Hannah Dale, a missing child from 2018, last seen near Crowford Marsh. Her case had gone cold 2 years before Rook was retired from service. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, her heart hammering. Wells looked over the file, jaw tightening. "That's not coincidence," he said. "Rook was assigned to that search. He failed to locate her because the area flooded that year. He's been carrying that scent ever since." In the observation room next door, Rook lay beside Emmett, the boy's hand absently stroking his fur. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady. He lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching. His eyes focused on the window between the rooms where Wells was pacing. When Wells stepped out, the dog stood pulling gently at the leash, guiding Emmett toward the agent. Clara frowned. "What's wrong?" Wells shook his head, unsure. "Let's find out." Rook led them out of the lab, down the corridor, and toward a wall covered with missing persons posters, a grim collage of faces and years. He stopped at one photo, a different girl slightly older, her file marked inactive. The caption read, "Missing 2019, last seen at Crowford Marsh entrance." The dog whined softly, pawing at the wall. Clara stepped closer, her throat tight. "He's telling us something." Wells's voice was low. "He remembers the scent." That's the same year Morrow moved out of county jurisdiction. He wasn't hiding from law enforcement. He was following victims. Following Briggs's voice startled them. He had arrived quietly behind them, coat damp from the rain. Or hunting, Wells said. "The soil, the missing girls, the van, it's all pointing to Crowford Marsh." Briggs exhaled sharply. "Then we're not done here. Prepare a warrant. We're going back there." Rook wagged his tail once, but it wasn't excitement. It was readiness. That night, as thunder rolled across the horizon, Emmett sat awake beside his bed, Rook lying close. His mother slept in the next room, unaware that her son was wide-eyed, whispering into the darkness. "You knew," he said quietly, stroking the dog's fur. "You remembered before anyone else did." Rook shifted closer, resting his head on the boy's knee. The room felt safe again, though both of them knew safety was a borrowed thing. Emmett looked towards the window, where lightning briefly illuminated the sky. Somewhere out there in the marshland where Rook had once searched and failed, the story wasn't finished. And deep in his heart, he felt it the same pull the dog had followed all this time. Not fear anymore. Purpose. At dawn, the convoy rolled out toward Crowford Marsh. The headlights cut through mist as federal vehicles followed a narrow dirt road winding through pine and mud. Judge Briggs sat in the passenger seat of the lead SUV beside Wells. Behind them, Clara drove with Emmett and Rook in the back, the boy holding the leash tightly. The closer they got, the quieter everyone became. The marsh stretched out in gray fog, a graveyard of secrets. Wells parked the car and stepped out. "Let's move," he said, his voice a whisper swallowed by the damp air. Rook leapt from the vehicle, nose low, tail straight, every muscle focused. The convoy crept through the mist of Crowford Marsh tires, groaning in the mud headlights, carving narrow tunnels of light through the trees. The rain had stopped, but the air still tasted of metal and moss. Judge Briggs sat silently in the lead SUV coat collar, turned up against the damp chill, watching through the windshield as the world turned from road to wilderness. Every instinct told him that this was where the story began to bleed into its truth. In the back seat, Emmett held Rook's leash fingers curled tight around the worn leather. The German Shepherd sat upright, gaze fixed ahead, body poised with that strange stillness that only dogs have when they know something familiar hides in the distance. Clara Hayes drove her jaw tense, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of Wells's voice over the radio. "Half a mile out," Wells said. Thermal drone picked up an old structure ahead. "Looks abandoned." Briggs nodded, even though no one could see him. "That'll be it," he murmured. "The place that keeps calling the dog." As they neared the coordinates, the road dissolved into dirt, then roots, then nothing but a faint path that seemed carved by forgotten footsteps. The SUVs stopped, doors opening with soft thuds. The marshland stretched wide, pines rising like shadows of giants. In the center stood a cabin barely visible through the mist, a sagging wooden structure with moss clinging to its sides, windows covered in grime, and a door hanging half open like a mouth too tired to speak. Rook leapt from the vehicle paws, splashing in shallow puddles. He sniffed the air, head lifting sharply toward the cabin. His tail stiffened, and a deep growl rolled from his chest. Wells approached cautiously, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. "He's got something," he said. Rook moved forward, slow but deliberate each step, pulling the leash tighter. Emmett followed without hesitation, mud sucking at his boots. "Stay close to the boy," Briggs ordered, his voice firm but gentle. Clara nodded, keeping a steady pace behind them. When they reached the porch, Rook stopped, nose pressed to the damp wood. He pawed once at the boards near the threshold, then looked back at Emmett, barking sharply twice. The boy froze. His hand trembled on the leash. Then he whispered so quietly, only Clara heard him. "He remembers this smell." Wells's eyes flicked toward Briggs, but the judge said nothing. He was too busy watching the dog's every move. The porch creaked under their weight as they entered the cabin. Dust motes swirled in the air, disturbed by flashlights slicing through the gloom. The room smelled of mildew rust and something metallic beneath it. Old blood or fear, maybe both. A single table stood in the corner, its surface scarred by years of use. Against the far wall hung a row of hooks, some still holding lengths of frayed rope. Briggs felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Search every inch," he said. "This place is wrong." Wells motioned to two agents to sweep the perimeter while he and Clara examined the interior. Emmett stood near the doorway, Rook pressed against his side. Then Rook's ears flicked. He moved to the center of the room, and began sniffing the floorboards, circling once, twice, before stopping over a section that looked slightly newer than the rest. He pawed at it again and claws scraping wood. Wells crouched beside him, tapping the floor with the butt of his flashlight. The hollow echo answered back. "We've got a crawl space," he said. Briggs exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. "Get it open." One of the agents pried the boards loose, the nails groaning as they came free. A gust of cold, stale air rose from below, carrying with it a faint sound, something soft, a breath, maybe a cry. Everyone froze. Rook whined, leaning over the edge, ears twitching. Wells aimed his flashlight into the darkness. A narrow stairway descended into a hidden basement. The walls were lined with damp stone, and at the bottom sat a small figure huddled beneath a thin blanket. The beam of light caught her face, pale, streaked with dirt, eyes wide with the kind of fear that forgets how to hope. Clara gasped. "Dear God." Wells descended first, moving slowly, his gun lowered. "It's okay," he called softly. "We're here to help." The girl didn't move at first. Her wrists were bound with a length of chain bolted to the floor. She flinched when the light hit her eyes. "You're safe now," he said, kneeling. "We're not going to hurt you." Behind him, Rook barked once and started down the stairs before anyone could stop him. He reached the girl, tail wagging faintly, nose pressing to her hand. She stared at him in disbelief, then whispered something, her voice raspy and cracked. "You came back." Clara felt tears well in her eyes. "She knows him," she whispered. Briggs swallowed hard. That means she was here before. Wells removed the chain carefully, his hand steady even as his jaw tightened. "Call medics," he said into his radio. "We've got a live recovery." The agents above moved quickly, voices echoing through the cabin. Within minutes, the girl was wrapped in a blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. She clung to Rook, fingers buried in his fur. The shepherd stood guard beside her, unflinching, his scar catching the light like a medal earned through grief. Clara crouched beside them. "Sweetheart," she said gently. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, lips trembling. "Lydia," she whispered. He used to bring the dog here." Briggs's blood went cold. "The dog." "Yes," she said. "He called him Ruger. He made him stay while—" Her voice broke off into a sob. Clara hugged her eyes, burning. "It's over, Lydia. He'll never hurt you again." Wells stood nearby, fists clenched. "That's confirmation," he said grimly. "Morrow used this place. The alias was real. He had Rook here when he was an informant. That's how the dog knew it." Outside, the sound of sirens grew closer, winding through the trees like wailing ghosts. Briggs stepped out onto the porch, the cold air hitting him like a weight. He watched as medics carried Lydia toward the convoy, Rook walking beside her, tail, low gaze, alert. Emmett followed behind, holding the leash loosely, a quiet pride in his small steps. The judge's heart twisted. He'd spent his career defining justice in black and white, but today it felt alive. Breathing, bleeding carried on 4 legs. Wells joined him on the porch, lighting a cigarette despite the rain. "This is going to blow the case open," he said. By the time the trial resumed, the world outside had already changed. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras waiting for movement, their headlines pre-written about the boy, the dog, and the miracle in the marsh. Inside, the mood had hardened from curiosity to conviction. Everyone who had stood inside that damp cabin knew what they had seen. A place of cruelty rediscovered by loyalty. The courtroom lights felt colder, now brighter, like interrogation lamps instead of chandeliers. Judge Briggs entered quietly, coat still damp from the fog outside. He carried the weight of what had been uncovered in his expression, though his voice remained calm. "We are reconvened," he said. "The prosecution may proceed." Clara Hayes stood tall, a stack of folders in hand. Her eyes met Morrow's for the first time since the raid, and for the first time, he looked away. He had shaved that morning, but it did nothing to hide the hollow fatigue in his face. The jurors avoided his eyes. No one wanted to meet the gaze of someone who had caged a child. Rook sat at Emmett's side again, permitted by the court, after Briggs personally overruled the defense's objection. The dog's calm presence filled the room with something stronger than security. It felt like truth. Clara began. "Your Honor, the state submits physical evidence recovered from the cabin in Crowford Marsh, verified by FBI forensics." She nodded toward Agent Wells, who stepped forward, placing sealed bags on the evidence table, fragments of chain sections of floorboard photographs, of tire tracks, soil samples, and one photograph of a black glove marked with faded embroidery. The projector flickered to life, casting images onto the courtroom wall. "The DNA on these chains," Clara said, voice steady, "matches the defendant's genetic profile. So does the blood sample recovered from a splintered floorboard beneath the trap door. We also have tire impressions consistent with the defendant's vehicle." Morrow's lawyer rose sharply. "Objection circumstantial." Briggs cut him off. "Overruled. Continue." Clara advanced another slide, showing a close-up of the recovered glove. During the search, she continued, a pair of gloves was found partially buried behind the cabin. The gloves bear the logo of the County K-9 Division, the same program in which the defendant served as a civilian consultant. It's an old design discontinued 6 years ago. Morrow shifted in his seat, eyes flicking toward the projection. For the first time, his control cracked. His fingers twitched. Rook's head lifted instantly, nostrils flaring. The dog's eyes locked on the image, then on the man. A low growl filled the silence, rolling from chest to floor like thunder trapped in fur. Every person in the room felt it in their bones. Emmett's hand tightened on the leash, whispering, "Easy." But Rook didn't look away. His gaze never left Morrow, the sound deepening into something almost mournful. A growl not of anger, but recognition. Clara turned towards the judge. "Your Honor, permission to note the reaction of the animal witness." Briggs hesitated only a moment. "Dean noted," he said. The court stenographer typed the words, her fingers shaking slightly. Morrow's lawyer rose again, voice tight. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The dog cannot testify." Briggs leaned forward. "No counselor, but it can remember," the gallery murmured. Clara pressed on. "The pattern on those gloves," she said, switching to the next image, "matches the same pair visible in a 2018 surveillance photo from the original K-9 impound facility raid. The defendant was photographed wearing them while tagging confiscated animals. We have corroborating timestamps and records." Wells stepped closer to the bench, handing a document to the bailiff. "We verified the metadata, Your Honor. It's authentic." Briggs looked down at the paper. His face tightened, then he looked back toward Morrow. "Mr. Morrow, would you care to explain how your old work gloves ended up buried beside a site that held an abducted child?" Morrow's jaw clenched. His lawyer whispered something, but the man didn't answer. Rook's growl faded, replaced by a sharp bark that echoed through the room. The bailiff moved as if to remove the dog, but Briggs raised his hand. "Leave him." The silence that followed was louder than any objection. Clara used it. "This case isn't about coincidence," she said, her voice trembling only once. "It's about pattern. The same soil on his van, the same logo on his gloves, the same child his dog remembered before anyone else did." She looked toward Emmett, then back at the judge, and the same cruelty that tried to hide behind silence. The jury shifted, some wiping at their eyes, others hardening their expressions. Morrow sat still, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between the evidence and the boy across from him. Emmett didn't look away. The room was too quiet for such small defiance to go unnoticed. Clara stepped back. "The prosecution rests for today." Briggs nodded, taking off his glasses. Court adjourned until tomorrow morning. The gavel struck once hollow and final. As people began to move, Morrow leaned toward his attorney, whispering fiercely, his face pale. The lawyer tried to calm him, but Morrow's hand slammed against the table, startling even the deputies. Rook barked again, one short, controlled sound that silenced the room. Briggs looked up sharply. "Remove the defendant," he ordered. Two deputies pulled Morrow to his feet. As they led him toward the side door, he glanced once over his shoulder at Emmett. For the briefest moment, something like recognition flickered there. Not of victory, but of guilt finding its mirror. When the door shut, the sound lingered in the boy's chest, like the closing of a chapter written in fear. Afterward, in Briggs's chambers, Clara Wells and the judge reviewed the day's proceedings. Wells placed his hands on the table, leaning forward. "We've got him cornered," he said. "DNA gloves, tire tracks. There's no hole left to crawl through." Briggs shook his head slowly. "There's always a hole. But this time, the dog sealed it before we could." Clara smiled faintly despite exhaustion. "Rook did more for justice than half the men I've ever worked with. Because Rook isn't looking for praise," Briggs said. "He's looking for peace." Outside, as the courthouse emptied, Emmett waited on the steps with Rook at his side. The boy's face was calm, almost serene, though his eyes carried something older than his years. The photographers stayed back, respecting the space around them. The boy leaned down, whispering into the dog's ear, his voice small but clear. "You did good today." Rook rested his head against the child's knee, eyes half-closed, tail thumping softly against the stone. The next morning, the courthouse felt like a held breath. The rain had passed, leaving the city washed clean, but uneasy, like it knew something momentous was coming. The crowd outside was larger than ever, reporters pressed against the steps, microphones ready, waiting for the verdict of a story that had already gone beyond the courtroom. Inside, the air was sharp, sterile, heavy with tension. Judge Briggs entered from chambers wearing an expression carved from stone. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Clara Hayes sat at the prosecution table, eyes locked on her files, though her mind was already 3 steps ahead. Across from her, Morrow sat slumped, the arrogance of earlier days gone. His suit looked looser. His hands trembled as he smoothed his tie, and there was a hollow glaze in his eyes that told everyone he was losing the internal war. Behind him, his lawyer whispered frantic instructions, but Morrow didn't seem to hear. He was looking past the jurors, past the walls, to something that wasn't there, something he had tried to bury in both dirt and memory. Emmett sat quietly in the front row, Rook at his side, as always. The boy's hand rested on the leash, his breathing even calm. He didn't understand every word of what was happening, but he understood what mattered. The man who took lives was about to lose his lies. When the bailiff announced that the defendant had chosen to take the stand, the courtroom stirred with disbelief. Briggs raised an eyebrow, but gave no comment. "If you're sure," he said evenly. Morrow nodded, jaw tight. His lawyer's whisper turned into a plea. "Don't do this." But Morrow stood a slow, trembling rise, as though gravity fought him at every inch. He walked toward the witness chair, his shoes dragging faintly on the marble floor. As he took his oath, his voice cracked dry and uncertain. "I swear to tell the truth." For the first time, he sounded like a man who knew what truth was, even if he'd spent years running from it. Clara approached, calm, poised. "Mr. Morrow," she began softly, "you understand the gravity of your position." "I do," he murmured. "You are accused of multiple counts of abduction, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy tied to Crowford Marsh. Do you deny those charges?" He hesitated. His lawyer's hand twitched, a silent warning. Then Morrow looked up, eyes darting toward Emmett, then to the dog sitting still beside him. "No," he said quietly. A wave of whispers rippled through the gallery. Briggs struck the gavel once. "Order." Clara stepped forward. "Then for the record, you are confessing to these crimes." Morrow's hands shook. "I am," his lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection, my client is under duress." Morrow interrupted, his voice hoarse but clear. "No, I'm not under duress. I'm done lying." The words fell like stones in the still air. He leaned forward, elbows on the rail. "It started years ago," he said. "I worked with the K-9 division during that raid. We were supposed to help track contraband rescue victims, but I saw opportunity. The system was sloppy. No one watched the handlers closely. I could go anywhere, open any door, walk into any home under the pretense of looking for evidence." Clara's jaw clenched. "So you use that trust to abduct your victims?" At first, he said, swallowing hard, "I just wanted control. It gave me power. I thought no one would notice one missing girl than another. The marsh was big easy to disappear into, until that dog showed up." His eyes flicked toward Rook. Ruger, they called him then. He found what I buried. Every time he got close, I'd move the evidence, burn the traces, but he kept coming back. When the raid ended, I made sure they thought he was unstable aggressive. They retired him early, and I thought I was free. He paused, rubbing his wrist, as if the memory burned there. But when I saw him again with that boy, I knew it wasn't over. Clara's voice was quiet, but firm. "You recognize the dog before you recognize the child." "Yes," Morrow whispered. "You could forget a face, but not the sound of a growl that cuts through your bones." His lawyer covered his face with his hand, whispering, "Please stop." But it was too late. Morrow was unraveling now, his words spilling faster, louder, desperate to purge what years of deceit had caged. "I didn't plan to hurt the boy," he said. "I just wanted to make sure the dog never found me again. But when I grabbed him, the dog came. I still have the scar." He yanked his sleeve up before anyone could stop him. Gasps echoed through the room. A thin, pale scar ran along his forearm, unmistakable in its jagged shape, the mark of a canine bite. "That was him," Morrow said, his voice trembling. "He bit me the night they found the boy. He would have killed me if they hadn't pulled him off." Briggs's voice was low, shaking despite control. "You're admitting to attacking both the child and the dog?" Morrow nodded. "I'm admitting that I lost to them, that I always would." He looked at Rook again, eyes wide with something close to terror. "I never feared the police or the law or the jury. I feared him because he remembers. He doesn't forget like people do." The room was dead silent. The jurors stared at him as though he had already condemned himself. Clara stepped closer, voice barely a whisper. "Then why confess now?" "Because I dreamed about the sound," he said, his words breaking. "Every night since that marsh. I heard him bark, and I saw what I did. You can't outrun that sound." Rook's head tilted slightly, as if understanding. Then he rose, stepping forward until his body touched the wooden rail that separated him from the defendant's table, his eyes fixed on Morrow. The man flinched visibly, recoiling. "See," Morrow said, almost shouting. "He knows." "Yes," Clara said softly. "He knows what you did, and now we all do." Briggs lifted the gavel, but didn't strike it yet. The moment was too human for procedure. Morrow's lawyer sank into his chair, defeated. The courtroom's collective breath seemed to hold still as the judge finally spoke. "The record will show that the defendant has confessed under oath to all counts listed. This court finds the confession admissible. The trial is concluded." He paused, lowering his gaze toward the dog. Sometimes, he said quietly, justice comes with a heartbeat. The gavel struck 3 times, echoing through the room like gunshots of closure. Morrow's slumped head hanging low, sobbing quietly as deputies cuffed him. The sound was raw, pitiful, but no one looked away. Clara exhaled, tears welling despite her control. She turned toward Emmett, who sat silently, his face unreadable. Rook moved to him, pressing his body against the boy's legs. The child's hand found his head, automatically fingers sinking into the fur that had carried him through darkness into light. Judge Briggs stood and left the bench without another word. He walked to the window at the back of the courtroom, staring out at the clearing sky. A single beam of sun cut through the gray clouds, landing directly on the boy and his dog. For the first time in years, he let himself smile, not out of victory, but gratitude. Outside the city, noise began to rise again, muffled by the courthouse walls, life resuming its indifferent rhythm. But inside that courtroom, for just a heartbeat, everyone felt the sacred silence that follows the truth. The courthouse was quiet now, stripped of the chaos that had once filled its halls. The banners were gone. The reporters had vanished, and the echo of the gavel that ended Morrow's trial had become something people only whispered about in coffee shops and corner diners. For Judge Briggs, the silence afterward was both relief and ache. He had seen justice done in its purest form, but he couldn't forget the faces that had made it happen. A frightened boy, a scarred dog, and a courtroom full of people who had learned that truth could wear fur and walk on 4 legs. 3 weeks passed. The world had already moved on. Papers ran stories about the boy and the dog who spoke without words. Television specials romanticized it. The headlines faded as new tragedies replaced the old, but Briggs couldn't let it go. Something unfinished pulled at him, something quieter than justice, something human. That morning, he found himself standing outside a small brick house on the edge of town, hat in hand. It was Emmett's home. The boy's mother, Camille Rowe, greeted him at the door, her expression soft but tired. "Judge Briggs," she said, her voice gentle with surprise. "You didn't have to come all the way here." He smiled faintly. "I needed to see them, both of them." She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The living room was warm, filled with the soft hum of an old heater and the faint scent of cinnamon. Toys lay scattered on the floor, a quilt draped over the couch. Near the window, sunlight pooled across a rug where Rook lay stretched out half asleep, his head resting on Emmett's lap. The boy looked up as Briggs entered, but said nothing. His eyes, still that same deep brown, still carrying more years than his age allowed, watched quietly. "You look better," Briggs said, softly, taking a seat across from him. Emmett didn't answer, but his hand moved absently, stroking Rook's fur. Camille poured coffee, her hand steady for once. "He's doing better," she said. "Still quiet, but he smiles now. That's something." Briggs nodded. "That's everything." He set down his hat, eyes resting on Rook. "You've got a remarkable friend there, young man." Emmett's hand paused for a second, then continued. The judge leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You know the court still talks about him. The department wants to give him a medal. For valor beyond speech, they're calling it." Rook's ears twitched at the word speech, as if he understood. Camille smiled faintly. "He doesn't need medals. He's got this one." She gestured to Emmett, who was tracing something small and round on Rook's collar, a brass tag engraved with his name. Briggs noticed another tag next to it, newer, polished, a gift from the court, etched with the judge's own handwriting. It read, "For courage that spoke louder than words." For a moment the room was still. Then Briggs reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small recorder. "I brought something," he said. Camille frowned. "What's that?" "A copy of the confession," he said. "I thought maybe it could help him understand that it's really over." Camille hesitated, but nodded slowly. "If you think it's right." Briggs looked to Emmett. "You can turn it off any time you want, son. I promise." The boy stared at the device, expression unreadable. Rook lifted his head, ears perked, sensing the shift in energy. Briggs pressed play. The tape hissed softly, then Morrow's voice filled the room, fragile, trembling, breaking under the weight of truth. "I never feared the police. I feared the dog." The sound sent a visible shiver through Emmett. His hand froze mid-motion. Rook whined softly, leaning closer, his head pressing against the boy's shoulder. Camille stepped forward, but Briggs gestured for her to wait. "It's all right," he murmured. "He's safe here." The tape continued Morrow's words, cracking under the memory of guilt. "He remembers. He doesn't forget like people do." Then Briggs stopped the recording. The silence afterward was thick enough to touch. Emmett's small shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from something loosening inside him. Tears welled in his eyes, his breath coming in uneven waves. Rook stayed close, unmoving, letting the boy's tears fall onto his fur. Camille took a step forward, whispering, "It's okay, baby, you can cry." Emmett turned toward Rook, burying his face into the dog's neck. The sob that left him was silent, but heavy years of noise finally breaking free in quiet surrender. Briggs looked away, his throat tightening. He had seen witnesses fall apart on the stand, criminals weep under sentence, but this was something sacred. When the boy finally lifted his head, his face was streaked with tears. He looked at Rook, eyes red, lips trembling, and then in a voice fragile as wind through leaves, he spoke for the first time. "Thank you." Two simple words barely above a whisper, but they struck the room like thunder. Camille gasped, hands flying to her mouth. "Emmett," she breathed, "say it again." The boy didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Rook, repeating softly, "Thank you." Rook wagged his tail once, pressing his nose to the boy's hand. Briggs felt a tear slip down his own cheek, unashamed. He stood voice low and reverent. "Well, I think that's the best testimony I've ever heard." Camille knelt beside her son, hugging him fiercely. "You did it," she whispered through tears. "You finally found your voice." Emmett shook his head gently. "He found it for me." Rook gave a quiet bark, as if to agree. The sound made Camille laugh and cry all at once. Briggs smiled, his chest aching with the kind of ache that only comes from witnessing grace. The recorder still sat on the table, the red light blinking softly before fading to black. The case was closed. The law satisfied, but the truth, real truth, was still alive in that room, breathing between the heartbeat of a boy and the loyal rhythm of a dog's tail against the floor. Later, as Briggs prepared to leave, he turned once more at the doorway. "You know," he said gently, "in all my years, I've seen men use 1,000 words to deny guilt. But today, 2 words were enough to prove healing." Camille smiled through her tears. "Thank you for believing in them." Briggs shook his head. "They did all the believing. I just made space for it." Outside, the late afternoon light stretched long across the street. The air smelled of wet grass and the faint sweetness of spring coming early. As the judge walked toward his car, he looked back once more through the window. Emmett sat on the rug, Rook's head resting on his lap. The boy was speaking now soft, hesitant words, telling the dog about clouds and marshes and dreams of running. Each word stumbled, but each was stronger than the last. And Briggs knew then that language wasn't measured in fluency, but in courage. When he finally drove away, the sound that lingered in his memory wasn't the gavel or the confession. It was the quiet, steady hum of a child rediscovering his voice beside the one creature who had never stopped listening. Spring came early that year, warm and steady, as if the world itself was trying to make up for everything winter had taken. The trial was months behind them now, but its echo still lived quietly in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The courthouse steps had long since emptied of reporters, but sometimes strangers still left small notes, their folded pieces of paper that simply said, "Thank you," or "I believe again." Judge Briggs saw them one morning on his way to chambers and smiled. He didn't need the news to tell him that something in the town had changed. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was a heartbeat people had felt together, and the memory of it hadn't faded. Across town in the Rowe family's small backyard, Rook lay beneath the oak tree where he used to chase falling leaves. His muzzle had gone grayer, his steps slower, but his eyes still carried that same fierce, loyal light. Emmett sat beside him, sketching in a small notebook, tongue between his teeth in concentration. He was speaking now, not often and not loudly, but enough that his words had begun to fill the spaces that silence once ruled. "You like the sunshine, huh?" he murmured. Rook gave a soft grunt tail, thumping once against the grass. "Mom says you're getting old," Emmett said, voice gentle. "But I think you're just tired of saving people." The dog's eyes half closed, as if in agreement. Camille watched from the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Her son was growing into something beautiful, still quiet, but strong in a way that didn't need explanation. Sometimes at night, she still heard him talking softly in his room, whispering stories to Rook in words that once refused to come. She never interrupted. Some prayers didn't need witnesses. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the courthouse. Judge Briggs had organized a small ceremony at the town hall, nothing grand, just a gathering of those who had been part of the trial. The letter mentioned a plaque and a medal, but what caught Camille's breath was the closing line written in the judge's own hand. "Let's honor him while he can still hear his name." 2 weeks later, the hall was filled. It wasn't just officers and lawyers. There were families, children rescue workers, and neighbors who had followed the story. Rook stood at the center, a little stiff, wearing a new collar polished until it gleamed. Emmett held the leash proudly, his small suit jacket a little too big at the shoulders. When Judge Briggs took the podium, the room fell silent. "We gather today," he began, "not just to honor a case that changed this community, but a companion who reminded us that justice doesn't always speak our language." His voice wavered slightly. "This dog Rook taught us that memory can be sacred, that loyalty can heal what courts cannot, and that sometimes the truest witnesses have no need for words." The applause that followed was soft at first, then thunderous. Emmett looked down at Rook, who blinked slowly, tail moving just enough to show he understood. Briggs gestured for the boy to join him. "Emmett," he said, "I believe Rook would want you to have the last word." The boy froze, eyes wide, but the room's kindness held him up like invisible hands. He stepped toward the microphone, his heart pounding, his mother's eyes shining with quiet pride. He looked down at Rook, then up at the crowd. "I didn't talk for a long time," he began, his voice small but clear. "People thought I was scared. Maybe I was, but Rook wasn't. He never stopped listening even when I couldn't say anything. He never left." The room stilled, every breath waiting. He found people who were lost. He found me too. He glanced toward Judge Briggs, who nodded softly. "Everyone says he's brave, but Rook didn't fight because he was brave. He fought because he loved. And love doesn't forget, even when it hurts." Emmett paused, his throat tightening. "The man who hurt us, he's gone now, but I'm not angry anymore. I think Rook forgave him before I did. That's how he wins, even when people lose. He remembers what matters and lets go of the rest." A murmur of tears and sniffles spread through the crowd. Briggs turned away briefly, blinking hard behind his glasses. Emmett bent down, wrapping his arms around Rook's neck. "You can rest now," he whispered into his fur. "You kept your promise." The medal was placed gently around Rook's collar, shining gold under the hall lights. For a brief, perfect moment, he lifted his head and barked once, a sound of pride, of farewell, of everything that had ever been trapped between pain and peace. The crowd erupted again, clapping, crying, standing. Cameras flashed, but no one saw a hero. They saw a truth alive before them, breathing, tail wagging weakly, as if to say goodbye. Weeks passed after the ceremony, and spring deepened into summer. Rook's strength faded gradually, but he stayed beside Emmett every day. When his final morning came, the sun was gentle, the sky washed with soft blue. Emmett woke to find Rook lying beneath the window, still and peaceful, one paw resting on the notebook where the boy had drawn their story. There was no sound, no whimper, no struggle, only stillness, as if he had simply followed the last trail home. Camille found her son sitting beside him, eyes red but calm. "He's not gone," Emmett whispered, his voice steady, in a way that made her heart break and mend all at once. "He just finished his work." And at the funeral beneath the oak tree, Judge Briggs spoke few words. "Every soul leaves something behind," he said quietly. "Some leave memories, some leave laws. But the best leave love that doesn't fade." He looked at the boy standing beside the small wooden marker and added softly, "You taught us, Emmett, that healing is the truest form of justice." The wind rustled through the leaves as if in agreement. Months later, when the town erected a new bronze statue outside the courthouse, it wasn't of the judge, or the agents, or the lawyers. It was of a boy and his dog sitting side by side, the leash looped between them like an unbroken thread. At the base, carved in simple letters, was the quote chosen by Emmett himself, "Love remembers what justice forgets." People came from other towns to see it, Some brought flowers, others whispered stories about dogs they had once loved. But those who knew the truth always noticed the small detail, the boy's hand resting over the dog's heart. Because that was where it had all begun, and that was where it would stay. Years later, when Emmett was older, he still visited the statue on quiet mornings, sitting in the same spot with a new puppy by his side. He would whisper the same words he had spoken that day at the town hall. "Thank you for finding me." And somewhere in the soft wind that moved through the pines, he always imagined he could hear a faint bark echoing back, not a goodbye, but a reminder. Some stories don't end. They live on in every life they touch. The end. If this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Tell us in the comments what part hit you hardest and where you're watching from. We'd love to know your story too.